good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are joining us from today. Welcome to today's webinar, New Frontiers in Mobile Biometrics. My name is Peter O'Neill, and I am the president of FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World. And we are just back from one of the world's hottest conferences, Mobile World Congress in Barcelona. This is one of my very favorite conferences, and it's where I go to see cutting-edge technology well before it hits mainstream. Artificial intelligence, IoT, blockchain, robotics, connected living, 5G technology was very hot. Drones, VR, mobile payments, autonomous vehicles, and of course, biometrics were more visible than ever this year. Our own managing editor, Peter Counter, was a GLOMO judge again this year, his third year, and we are very proud of the work he does to help the GSMA select the winning applications and products in mobility every year. Well done, Peter. We also did about 20 podcasts with our biometric clients exhibiting at Mobile World Congress. It was a very busy week for us at FindBiometrics and Mobile ID World, and a big thanks to our all-star editorial team who brought it all together for our industry. Up next for us is ISC West in 3 weeks. This is the giant physical access and enterprise security show in Las Vegas. And like with Mobile World Congress, we will be doing a follow-up webinar with the ISC on April 25th. Again, biometrics are visible everywhere at ISC. Over the past 5 years, we have established premier partnerships, like with ISC West, to help grow biometrics in important vertical markets. We are also very proud to have Money 2020 globally as our premier partner for financial services. And of course, our special relationship with the GSMA and FIDO. In fact, we will be doing a webinar with FIDO in May. Big news coming from FIDO these days. Now, I have rented a scooter in Barcelona for the Mobile World Congress for the past 4 years to zip in and out of where I stay in the old city to the conference. I park right at the front door along with a zillion other scooters. But next year, I am going to rent my own personal flying drone. Now, doesn't everyone want one of these? I just had to show you this particular shot. But back to biometrics now. In fact, I used facial recognition to gain entry to the Mobile World Congress show. And hats off to the GSMA to use facial recognition as an option to enter. I used it every day. It was so easy and convenient, and I avoided the lines. With so much going on, be sure to stay on top of all the breaking news by visiting FindBiometrics or our sister site, Mobile ID World. We're now in our 17th year, and we cover the market like no one else with in-depth articles, insights, the largest yearly review of our industry, featured theme months, newsletters, interview with all the leaders in this space, international speaking engagements, and of course, our now famous webinar series. And this month, all month long, we have been focusing on mobile biometrics. We have a lot to cover today, so I'm going to jump right in. Please note, if you'd like to ask a question, and I hope you do, just type it into the dialog box of the go-to control panel on the right side of your screen, and do this at any time. Don't wait until the end, as this will give us an opportunity to manage your questions, and we'll do our best to answer as many as possible at the end. This webinar will last about 40 minutes in total and will be recorded and available at findbiometrics.com. I'd now like to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors for their continuing support, BioCatch and Precise Biometrics, and a very special thanks to the Mobile World Congress and the GSMA. Now, to start off our discussions today, I am so pleased that David Pollington is able to join us from the UK. I had a chance to interview David at Innovation City about the growth in biometrics at Mobile World Congress and the work being done with Mobile Connect. I knew that our readers would love to get an update, and David has kindly offered to provide us with one. David is the Senior Director, Technology at the GSMA. Take it away, David.
Thank you very much, Peter. Thank you very much for the introduction. So, hello to everybody. My name is David Pollington. I work within the GSMA, within their technology department. And I'm just going to run you through a few interesting stats around Mobile World Congress that Peter has just been talking about, as well as a few choice headlines around global identity. So Mobile World Congress, for those that don't know, is an event that the GSMA stages in Barcelona every year. We also have World Congress events in Shanghai and now in the Americas as well. But the European event is the biggest. We have over 100,000 visitors from over 200 countries that attend the event. It truly is massive. And interestingly, there's a very high proportion of influencers, people in senior level positions, as well as CEOs. And we get a very broad spectrum of people attending. And we proactively encourage as much as we can for women to actually be able to partake in the keynotes, so we get a broad spectrum and a broad range of perspectives. As Peter was saying, this is the first year that we brought in facial recognition, and it was fantastic. I must admit, it was very well implemented. It was very simple and easy to use. So I think this is clearly a way forward, and it acts as a good complement to existing technologies using things like NFC. For this year, the Mobile World Congress was focused around the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So the whole theme of the show was really around how can we make the future better together. Okay, Peter, next one. So some of these topics Peter's already touched on, stealing some of my thunder, but 5G was a very, very big topic at the show. And a lot of that has been stimulated by the connectivity requirements for things like artificial intelligence, IoT, future of content and media, drones, a very fascinating topic as well as things like blockchain. So just to give a little bit of a sort of a perspective on 5G, we're going to see first commercial 5G networks launching later this year. It's predicted that by 2025, we'll have 1.2 billion 5G connections. And this is really all about opening up this new age of intelligent connectivity and really fostering the digital economy. And obviously within that, a very, very important thread is around authentication and the use of biometrics to allow people and things to be able to very clearly authenticate themselves and control their devices in the interconnected world. There were many, many devices announced and launched at the show. Obviously one here that you're probably already aware of is around the Galaxy S9 and what Samsung have been doing around intelligent scan. So, we're seeing lots of new modalities as well coming into mobile devices, which is very encouraging.
Now, David, before you leave this slide, could I ask a quick question about 5G?
Yeah.
Am I correct in thinking that 5G is really necessary for autonomous vehicles, for example, that more aggressive, more intelligent connectivity, more robust is really required for things like that, isn't it?
It is. I mean, the key thing with 5G, it reduces latency, it boosts bandwidth, but it also allows this heterogeneous network where we can bring in small cell technology. So lots of different networks can be used with autonomous vehicles. So as they're driving along, they can essentially be hopping from one network to the next and having that continuous connectivity at the low latency levels that they need to be able to communicate and to operate. So absolutely, 5G will be 5G and autonomous vehicles together will be very interesting. Okay, so just moving on. Yeah, no worries, Peter. So just moving on. So Mobile Connect is the identity initiative across all of the mobile operators worldwide. So we've had rapid growth over the past 12 months. We've now got over 470 million active users using Mobile Connect. And Mobile Connect, just to explain a little bit more, is an authentication and an identity service capability. So it's really leveraging the fact that you have your mobile device, you're able to very easily authenticate your mobile device using biometric, and then that can act as a proxy to authenticate you to online services and allows you as a user to control information about yourself that you might want to share with online service providers to make your life a lot easier in the way you transact online. So it's growing very rapidly. A lot of the demand is being stimulated in Europe by things like the PSD2 payment directive and GDPR around privacy. So increasingly, regulation is driving as well this need for this strong authentication and the ability for people to be able to take control of how they identify themselves online. Just go to the next one, Peter. So there was a few global identity announcements. I've just picked a couple here. One notably was around the US carriers are now coming on board with Mobile Connect, and they're launching a mobile authentication task force that will result in them bringing a proposition to market sometime later on this year. Very, very interesting stuff that they're doing. And the other thing which is looking a little bit further future is a lot of interest around decentralized identity frameworks, so moving beyond the federated identity frameworks that we have today to leveraging things like blockchain and distributed ledger technologies to provide a truly decentralized identity framework. And Sovereign is just one example of that kind of capability. And it's interesting, at least from my perspective, that a lot of the mobile operators, the carriers, see this as something which is very strategic for them, and they're starting to jump on board. So Deutsche Telekom, the T-Labs Innovation Unit, has been the first to sign up as a steward of the Sovereign network. It's fascinating stuff. Okay, so that's it for me. I'll hand back to yourself, Peter, and if there's any questions on the chat line.
Well, thank you very much, David, for that overview. And now I'd like to introduce our two other panelists joining us from BioCatch, Frances Zelazny, who is the Vice President of Marketing and somebody I have known for quite a few years, and from Precise Biometrics, Fredrik Clementson, Research and Development Director. Welcome. And we're going to jump right in. Our first question to the panel. There is an excitement in mobile biometrics now that is very reminiscent of the mobile revolution that occurred in the wake of the Touch ID release in 2013. Mobile biometrics are delivering on their promise of convenient security in ways that could really change lives. Is there another mobile revolution on the horizon, and how do you see the mobile biometric landscape evolving over the next 5 years? Frances, could I ask you to start off on this one for us, please?
Thank you, Peter, and thank you, David and Fredrik, for joining. I'm really pleased to be here. So as Peter, you mentioned, we've been working together on biometrics for a very long time, and I think the excitement that we see now is very reminiscent with other points in the evolution of the biometrics industry. I think the difference now is that we're seeing massive consumer adoption of mobile, and not only for just accessing phone, which is what most of the initial introduction of Touch ID really brought into play, but now we're seeing biometrics percolate in many, many, many different applications, and the phone in some ways being the ticket to many other verticals. So there is this notion of the phone as the authenticator. When you're on the device, the phone as your ticket when you're going through the airport, and the phone as the connector in the whole IoT world. And so that I think now makes the phone and the identity behind the phone the really most important currency element in terms of being able to trust who's using the device and what's really going on. And in terms of seeing where we're going to go, I think that and I've always said this, but it's not necessarily a one-size-fits-all. There will be a multitude of biometrics that work together. There are different biometrics that lend themselves to different applications, but there will have to be another layer that runs beneath the initial or beyond the initial, let's say, authentication, and manage what's happening throughout the entire session once a person has logged in or authenticated themselves to get in. So the layers and how we use biometrics and implement them, I think, will change.
Thank you very much, Frances. Fredrik, can I get your take on this question, please?
Oh, yes, sure. I'm happy to be part of this webinar. I agree that there will be a lot of more biometrics coming into mobile, and I think we're going to see more and more fingerprint sensors being used, especially in low-end devices where we see the price drop for capacitive sensors. And I also think we will see a lot of more modalities. We already have face from Apple, and I think the combination of modalities will be used more and more as security will be higher security will be requested. So combination of face and fingerprint, for instance, or fingerprint and behavior, or some other combination. So that's what I think we're going to see. And from a fingerprint sensor perspective, as you know, we're starting to see devices coming out that are using new technologies like optical sensors. So this is a shift I think we're going to see coming more and more this year, and then also in coming years, where you have everything from optical sensors to ultrasound sensors, and these sensors, they enable the user experience to be better with the edge-to-edge displays. So I think we're going to see more of that.
Well, thank you very much, Fredrik. And David, do you have a comment you'd like to add to this? Where do you see the mobile biometric landscape evolving over the next 5 years?
Yeah, I think just to build on what Frances and Fredrik were saying, there are going to be a multitude of sensors coming into future devices. And I think there's two things here. You know, one is that people want to be able to access services intuitively, interactively, without necessarily having to be challenged to keep on, presenting their finger or their iris to the device. But then equally, when they are actually transacting in a way which to them is personally sensitive, whether it's with a bank or it's with a healthcare company, they actually then do want that friction. So I think we're going to see this combination of passive sensors that allow you to safely transact online, and then much more kind of direct active sensors that you will use when you kind of want that friction to make sure that it really is just you that has access to that sensitive information. So I think it's that dynamic is going to be very interesting to see how that pans out.
Thanks, David. And our next question, how have the new identity regulations such as PSD2 changed the mobile biometric business for the better? What are new challenges emerging in this regulatory landscape, and how are they being addressed? And Fredrik, could you start us off on this question, please?
Yes, sure. Well, the new PSD2 directive, I see it more as an opportunity to see even more biometrics coming in use. So this requires that all the electronic payments are done using two-factor authentication or stronger. And we see this as a driver for fingerprint technology combined with other modalities to get the multi-factor authentication, which will increase the security of the transaction. So as we see it, the fingerprint authentication combined with either face or iris or behavioral or any other modality, that will be the most convenient solution for the end user. And fresh out of the event in Barcelona, I think you also saw the Vivo Apex concept phone where you can actually use two fingers to authenticate yourself.
Well, thank you very much. And David, can I get your take on this? You mentioned some of these new identity regulations in your overview.
Yes, absolutely. So as Fredrik was saying, the PSD2 is really about trying to safeguard the customer online and ensure that when a customer is making a payment or they're requesting the bank to make some kind of funds transfer, it really is the correct account holder that is making that request. So this is where PSD2 introduces some requirements around secure customer authentication. And I think everyone is looking at different ways in which they can best do that in a way that safeguards the user, but also doesn't necessarily, create too many obstacles. So a lot of the merchants, they like to have, a one-click approach to making purchases. But when a purchase is of a particular value, you know, how can you ensure that it really is the right person that's making that purchase? So it's all about safeguarding the user, and really the challenge is for us to work out how we can do that in a way which is also very intuitive and easy to use.
And you also mentioned some of the privacy regulations that are coming in, and with the news in the paper these days about the Facebook, I think those are critical as well.
Absolutely. I mean, GDPR is all about ensuring that you as a user have control of your data, and you are able to, you know, provide your consent and decide who has access to information about you, and how that's used and for what purpose, etc. So I think this is going to be the key thing that's going to change. At the moment, everybody is allowed to create an identity about you. In the future, and especially as I was talking in the past, previously around the decentralized identity, it will be about the user having complete control. So GDPR is just really just trying to bring in these elements of privacy that have been there in law for quite some time, but really tighten them up and making them a lot more specific to really make sure the users do have the ability to consent to how their information is being used.
Thanks, David. And Frances, you and I have had many discussions about this particular area. What's your take on some of these new identity regulations coming into the market?
So I think that PSD2 reflects a lot of the what we call the circle of identity. So beyond just authenticating the user, I think that there's a huge opportunity / requirement that is not necessarily talked about so much, and that is the original linking of the account from the payment provider to their bank account to open that up in terms of PSD2 and open banking. And that linkage means that the bank is now exposing you know, their account and the ability to move funds from the account to different merchants. And so there needs to be two levels of security, one on the TPP side to do the authentication, which is what David and Fredrik were alluding to, but also it behooves the bank to have their own fraud controls to make sure that when they do allow that linkage to happen, that they're not exposing themselves to additional liability. And those things, you know, can happen via behavior biometrics, for example, that will look at different user behaviors without changing the experience, but is having a sort of continuous authentication going on. And that would be, you know, I think one important area for consideration. And the other is really back to this combining different modalities and providing, thinking about what is the best way to provide the strong authentication while maintaining and enhancing the user experience. And in my opinion, the institutions and the organizations that can solve this problem are the ones that are going to see the best opportunity and succeed the most in a PSD2 world. And that goes not just on the transactional authentication, but also on that on the authentication requirement for every 90 days to do the linkage again back to the bank account. So I think that there are enormous things to consider where mobile fits in, and where all different modalities fit in.
Thank you very much, Frances. Next question. In the FindBiometrics year in review, liveness detection was identified as a major point of industry focus. Is mobility a driver in proof of life and liveness detection? David, can you weigh in on this one for us?
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic. You know, I think obviously when it comes to biometrics, liveness is very important. We've also been looking at liveness in relation to the mobile account itself. It's very easy. There's a lot of fraudsters out there that basically set up racks and racks of mobile devices and try and perpetrate account takeover attacks against things like banks. From our perspective, the mobile operators have a very clear insight as to whether or not it's a human using that device or whether it's a bot. So in terms of things like device activity, voice calls, etc., that's a good indication of activity. Coming back to what we were discussing earlier around the sensors in the devices, things like the accelerometers, the light sensors, they can also be used for picking up a lot of these kind of very important signals that help you understand that this is actually a real person, and it's not someone trying to perpetrate a fraud.
Thanks. And Frances, could I get your opinion on this question about liveness detection, please?
Liveness detection is one of the most, I think, hardest challenges for biometrics in the mobile or in the digital channel, and has been one of the, I would say, puzzles for the traditional biometrics world. There are obviously continued research and opportunities and major improvements in this area. But the truth is that most of the fraud that we see today comes after the authentication, which means after the login. Whether you're logging in with, you can log in with a legitimate /live biometric, but the fraudsters figured out how to get in on the other side and usurp and take over the session. And so the question of liveness in my mind is not necessarily just at the login. It's really to look at the continuous behavior throughout the session and make sure that nothing like malware or robotic attack or no one via social engineering tricks the user into letting them in. And so there's this whole other element of liveness, I think, that nobody's really considered. But again, the new modalities that are coming out are able to spin and change and deal with in a very, very different way.
Thanks, Frances. It certainly has been quite a shift over the last 3 years in that direction. And Fredrik, can I get your take on this, please? I know that your company has moved quite actively into liveness detection.
Oh yes, and we see this as a natural evolution of using biometrics, that we add the liveness part to it, and the more and more functionality we put in our devices, the more attractive it will become to try to spoof it, so you can get access to sensitive applications and of course payments being the top most sensitive one. So with this added value, the reason for breaking into the system will increase. And therefore, we have to find better measures to countermeasures to address this. Liveness is a very good part to do this, and by adding liveness, you can detect and avoid most spoofs attacks. So that's our take on it.
Thanks, Fredrik. Now, next question. What do you see as the single largest opportunity in mobile biometrics now? And Frances, I'm going to ask you, please, if you could start us off on this question.
I think the biggest opportunity in mobile biometrics is really a combination of biometrics. So we look at things in the authentication space, companies like Samsung FBS or Safety or others that are offering a suite of modalities, face, finger, iris, voice, and then I put for the login, and then they combine, let's say, behavioral for risk-based authentication, and then they have all the policies available for step-up and risk-based authentication. Those kinds of things, I think, are going to drive a faster and faster adoption. Also seeing, and I referred to this before, the mobile as the authenticator via all sorts of biometrics. Again, a component not only of verifying and doing one-to-one matching, but also using a biometric approach from a specifically behavioral perspective to look at all kinds of threats that may not be easily recognizable, malware or robotic attacks or emulators that are simulating, and taking over original login authentication. And all of those things together is really, really the new opportunity, and what extends beyond, I think, where biometrics have traditionally been thought of as, as the market. So way beyond government, way beyond travel for just border. I mean, now we're talking about using the mobile via biometrics to verify and authenticate identity for IoT, for healthcare, and obviously in financial services and with PSD2, large-scale payments. So it's just it's really that combination that's unleashing all these other new opportunities.
Thanks, Frances. And Fredrik, can you weigh in, please?
Oh yes, I completely agree that with Frances that, and as a consumer, as an end user, I really enjoy that the different modalities are appearing, and it gives me a choice in what biometric modality I want to use, and I can select to use the most suitable modality for me at any given scenario. For in one scenario, I might want to use fingerprint. In another one, I would like prefer face or something else. So I really see this as the multimodality as a great opportunity in the mobile biometrics. For us as a fingerprint company, the change in technology to in-display and under-display sensors is a great opportunity, and that enables the edge-to-edge displays in the mobile phones, creating a better user experience. So we're very excited about being part of that shift in technology.
Thank you very much, Fredrik. And David, what do you see as the largest single opportunity in mobile biometrics right now?
I think, as I said before, it's about that frictionless experience. I think, if you look at what Apple are trying to do with Face ID and what they originally tried to do with Touch ID, it's really trying to bring the process of authentication into the way that you are just interacting with a device, rather than trying to put some kind of barrier in front of the user in terms of, stop, you must authenticate before you can continue. So I think it is, how do we actually leverage all these different sensors in the device to provide that kind of frictionless experience? And as Fredrik was saying, as the devices are now used increasingly in our everyday lives, and especially with IoT, where you may need to be authorizing transactions on a whole periphery of devices around you, the importance of you being able to properly authenticate your device and then be able to provide that authorization is going to become paramount. So I think there's certainly a lot there that we need to be looking at.
Well, and David, that leads well into my next question, that whole frictionless concept. In the past 6 months, the majority of industry conversations we've been having have highlighted the growing importance of customer experience in the digital identity. Is the focus on user experience as a driving factor? Is this a positive influence on mobile biometrics? And do you see any risks in this paradigm of experience-first authentication that we're seeing emerging? Fredrik, could I get your take on this, please?
Yes, let's see. Sorry. Well, it's a convenience with a high level of security that has been a driving factor for mobile biometrics. So, and before we had the launch of Touch ID, most iPhones, they didn't have any security turned on at all. So with the biometrics, we can actually add to the security. Of course, there's always a risk that when you try to optimize user experience, then you could eventually jeopardize security. And as I see it, enrollment is one such topic. The most user-friendly enrollment process wouldn't need much interaction, but if you don't collect enough samples, then the system most likely, at least initially, will perform at lower security, and that it would only be to meet a better user experience. So and another aspect is that the market increase, and with that I mean low mobile devices, where the risk is that for cost reasons they are not the quality of these low cost devices are not secured and may enter to the market, and that could mean a lack of trust from end users. So to address this, we will welcome that biometric certifications from trusted authorities like FIDO and the Chinese CAICT, for instance. So to set the standards for biometric performance and liveness to ensure that we have good biometric solutions on the market.
Thank you very much. And David, could I get your take, please? Yeah, I think that's a very interesting and very valid point that Fredrik makes there. There is a danger that as the price points are driven down, as biometrics becomes a hygiene factor that all devices must provide, people inevitably could start cutting corners and that could undermine the public's confidence in the use of some of these biometric authenticators. So I think, that's one thing that the industry needs to be very mindful of, and I think that's something that we just need to look at as we go forward. Yeah, agree.
Thanks, Frances. Can I get your take, please?
Yeah, so actually I love this question because there's always been a significant trade-off and tension between the user experience and security. And I think that you could see, like, when Touch ID came out, all of the big hoopla, and really the purpose of the biometric was really from a convenience standpoint. So the person wouldn't have to type in a 4 or 6-digit PIN. But in fact, all they had to do was to say that they are not that they don't want to put the biometric, and then circumvent that with the PIN, which could be very easily guessed. So in fact, it was all about convenience and almost nothing about security. What we're seeing today is obviously that's not good enough, and we see that this tension is also causing many decisions to be made about different functionalities and features that go into mobile products. So there's a lot in terms of digital transformation that's being held back because of this. And I think the real opportunity now is to leverage some of the newer developments all around liveness in many of the physical modalities, combine those with voice modalities, as well as risk-based authentication approaches that don't require any active participation or action by the user, but that still provide ongoing and passive security. And having that work in the background and only requiring an interruption, so to speak, when there's an anomaly or when there is a higher risk profile or a higher risk type in the transaction itself, having that kind of interruption actually I think would be welcomed by users, and they would feel that their interests and their security interests are being addressed throughout the journey.
Well, thank you very much, and we're getting a lot of questions in from our attendees. Thank you very much, attendees, for putting your questions to us. So I'm going to move now to a couple that have come in. The first one has to do again with regulations that are coming into the market. How will GDPR affect operations of big tech, e.g. Google and Facebook? This is a very hot topic, obviously, and I'll just throw it out to anybody who'd like to take it. Hello? Frances, maybe you'll start off on this one.
Sure. So data privacy is a cornerstone of GDPR, and as David mentioned, all of the whole point of GDPR is to give users the knowledge and the right to say how their personal details are being used and to know for what purpose they're being used. And this is obviously going to affect many of the social media companies. It will also affect marketing companies and any other companies that are leveraging this kind of information for marketing, advertising, type of purposes. And I think as consumers, we want to know, we want to have the trust on the other side as well. So we're held accountable to ensure that we are who we claim to be, and that we're not misusing somebody else's personal information. We want to know that the organizations that we're dealing with have that same level of trust with us.
Thanks, Frances. Now, I'd like to add in, we're getting a lot of questions about storage and regulations of biometric data now. And Fredrik, I'm going to ask you to see if we can answer this question. Let me just phrase it into a question. So along with how will GDPR affect the operations of big companies, and how does storage and regulations of biometric data, how will that influence all of that?
Yeah, biometric data being a critical or sensitive personal information, it's very critical that you handle it according to the new regulation in GDPR. So that is something that every large company working with this kind of information is looking into. So and I think it's very good that we actually do get regulation in this area, so that we as end users can trust that all these companies that are working with our personal information is doing it in a way that can be trusted. Because as of now, we have to trust the companies using it, that they're doing it in the right manner. But with the GDPR, we can actually know that someone has taken the end user perspective of these things and force that into the mindset and the day-to-day operations of the big companies.
Great. And David, you know, just your take on this one. You know, in Barcelona, was the regulatory area a hot topic of conversation that you were aware of there?
Yeah, I think, you know, GDPR, PSD2, they're hot topics everywhere at the moment. And, you know, I think everyone is looking at, you know, the positive impacts that this is going to have, just to really, you know, help safeguard user privacy, just try to tighten up the laws and make sure the way that people are operating their businesses, you know, is truly in line with the actual expectations and needs of the general public. So I think most people see GDPR as a very good move forward in terms of user privacy.
Thank you very much. And we're getting some more questions about, you know, things like neural networks, AI, sort of these game-changing technologies. You know, how is that affecting things, and how can you know, the sort of renewed interest in multi-factor authentication take advantage of things such as geolocation or contextual identifiers? That's a lot of question, but Frances, can I ask you maybe to talk a little bit about that?
Can you just repeat? I just want to make sure I understood it properly.
Yeah, so with neural networks, artificial intelligence emerging, it is increasingly rare to see single-factor authentication. So with this new interest in multi-factor authentication that takes advantage of contextual identifiers such as geolocation, is this an opportunity for the industry, or is it a big challenge for us?
But this is not in the context of GDPR, right? This is just a general question?
Just a general question.
Okay. So I think that we already see many opportunities for tying different elements together in order to help ascertain the validity of an identity. So there's already this notion that it could be a device, but it could be a location, and many other factors. But I go back to what I said before. I think it's very hard to understand unless you are on the front lines with the fraud, that the fraudsters have already been able to circumvent all of these measures. So just because somebody is in the right location or is on the right device doesn't mean that it's the right user. So we've had examples where a person would be sitting in his office using his computer, and there was a remote access attack after the login, and the fraudster was essentially changing routing numbers and account numbers in the background while the person was sitting at their desk, and everything looked normal to them. So I think that these are indicators that are potentially interesting reference points, but they should not be taken as substitutes for user identity.
Well, thank you very much, panel. We're still getting a lot of questions in, but I'm afraid our time is up. And I'd like to again thank our sponsors, Precise Biometrics and BioCatch, for their continuing support, and especially to David Pollington from the GSMA for his updates today. Please join us for our next webinar on biometric enterprise security, April 25th, held in conjunction with ISC West. This concludes our webinar today. Thank you very much for attending. Bye.